anger threatens to overshadow the Prime Minister's conference speech today as many, many families face the reality of a drop in income with removal of the universal credit uplift.
Yes, a £20 a week reduction may not mean much, but for those struggling to cope with the pandemic, it's a matter of having food in the kitchen or going hungry. Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab joins us now. Very good morning to you, Dominic Raab. We heard from former Health Minister Edwina Currie earlier on the programme, which seemed remarkable. We asked a number of Conservative MPs to come and debate that issue. Glad you're here this morning. But Edwina Currie said that those who are struggling should simply go out and get a job as a kitchen porter. Do you agree?
No, look, that's not the way I'd characterise it. We've had £400 billion worth of support for the economy through this pandemic, including the uplift. You see, it was always going to be temporary. We're shifting and we're with job creation well beyond the forecast, with real wages rising. We want to try and make sure that we can help those who are able to get into work do so. So what we haven't mentioned is the £5 billion through the Restart and the Kickstart scheme, which will help those who are either on UC or at risk of longer-term unemployment get the jobs and the work that they need to be able to look after themselves. And also, of course, in terms of wages, and of course there's a cost of living issue for those who are in work, the extension to the national living wage, giving £4,000 per year back to those lower paid workers, other measures on raising the threshold for income tax that we've taken over many years. We're very much focused on making sure that with wages rising, we can support them. But sustainably over the long term, that's got to be done through job creation and rising wages, rather than relying on the welfare support and the government support through the pandemic, which, given the scale of it, was always going to have to be temporary.
OK, people are facing a national insurance hike next year. They're already facing fuel bills, and a number of people have suffered or lost out on work during the pandemic. So many people getting in touch with us this morning. Mizzy says, I can't work because of a serious illness, disability, mental health problems. This year I had a stroke. Do I choose heating or eating? Sean says frontline workers who already work and are poorly paid and need universal credits to live should go and get another job in the hospitality sector. Apparently, we've had people who have just qualified as, for instance, a psychiatric nurse dependent on universal credit to top up their income. We've had people who work as full-time carers for a member of their family. We heard the Health Secretary yesterday saying more of us should be doing that. They're dependent on more than £1,000 a year. You are saying it was only temporary, we're taking it away. Doesn't seem reasonable, does it?
And it's not levelling up, is it?
Well, sorry, first of all, you mentioned the national insurance. Of course, the 14% of the wealthiest taxpayers will shoulder the half of the revenue, and of course that's going to deal with the social care problem, which is precisely dealing with the issue that successive governments have talked about but not grappled with, and making sure we provide support for the most vulnerable. What I've said is that, of course, the emergency package, which has been enormous as we've gone through the pandemic, that can't continue forever, and with employment rising, vacancies, so job adverts at 1 million, with wages rising by over and above inflation, something like 6% on the latest data, with the national living wage, so we are supporting those in work but on the lower paid, and with £5 billion to help those reliant on UC or other benefits get into the kind of jobs that pay the wages that will be sustainable.
Let's just take one example then. We had the mum who said that her daughter had just qualified as a psychiatric nurse and is also reliant on universal credit. I don't understand what you're saying to that individual, because your thrust seems to be either go and get a job, or in the case of the 40% of people who are already employed and rely on universal credit, go and get yourself a better job.
Stop working in the health sector and go and do something else.
Is that what we're saying?
No, and of course, in the health sector, in the NHS, for the lowest paid, there have been pay increases, and we've got an independent process to make sure that we look at that, and we take that very seriously for all elements of the...
The nurses were promised a large pay rise and they were given peanuts. You all went out and clapped them, then you paid them next to nothing.
I'm afraid I don't accept that, Alistair. But long-term, sustainably, the emergency measures that got us through the pandemic, that kept 14 million people's jobs alive, we couldn't keep just paying the wages of all of those people. But the point is, as we transition out, there's £5 billion of support to help those reliant on UC or reliant or at risk of longer-term unemployment get back into work. And real wages are rising by 6% over and above inflation on the latest quarterly data compared to last year. So this is
which the ONS have challenged, as you know. When Boris Johnson used those figures.
No. I looked at the ONS explanation this morning, and it was very clear. Yes, of course, there's fluidity in the data throughout the pandemic, but the over and above inflation, it's 6% that wages have risen by on the year on year. That's the facts. The ONS are very clear on it.
I'll just point out the ONS did say the Prime Minister used what they call distorted figures at the weekend. Can I just ask you about the Afghanistan? You were the Foreign Secretary, and the Prime Minister said you would move heaven and earth to get those people we left behind out and to the UK. How much heaven and earth has been moved, and how many we got out since you stopped being Foreign Secretary? I accept it's no longer your responsibility, but I'd like to know just how much we've done on that.
Well, I don't have the data since I moved a week ago from the job, or just over a week ago. But what I can tell you is that since April through to the formal evacuation in August, up until the end of August, 17,000 people, that includes British nationals, Afghans who worked for us, but also vulnerable Afghans like the judges, the female rights activists, the journalists, have been either evacuated or provided safe passage to the UK in what is the biggest project, an airlift of its kind in living memory. And I think both the Foreign Office, but of course also the MOD, the military and the Home Office who worked on that, did an incredible job.
And on Afghanistan, I mean, one of the countries that cheered it on was Russia. You've been Foreign Secretary, you're now Justice Secretary. Do you think it is appropriate for so many members of the Cabinet and so many Conservative MPs to take money from Russians, some of whom, including people who've given money to your constituency, some of whom have been involved in, criminal cases? And, well, you're shaking your head, but you took money from a person who also gave money to Prince Charles, and Prince Charles has given that money back.
In all of these cases, not only is the law very strict in this country, and you'll be well aware of it from your time in politics, but we have meticulously made sure that we comply with the rules. And frankly, some of the people you're talking about were Russian-born but are now British citizens, or in any event, we don't accept foreign donations. You know the law very well. I appreciate the interest in this, particularly at time of Conservative Party conference, but we have absolutely meticulously followed the letter and the spirit of the law in place in this country.
Surely as a former Foreign Secretary, to have a quarter of the Cabinet funded by people, including people who are very close to President Putin, that cannot be right. Does that not concern you as somebody who's interested in the strategic power of the UK?
Of course. Of course, which is why we have very clear rules on it, and we've complied with all of them. And frankly, I don't accept the characterisation you put on it.
Okay.
I want to ask you about the inquiry that's been announced by Priti Patel into what led to the murder of Sarah Everard. Are you able to give us any more details about that? And can you also talk to us about why we have such a shockingly low conviction rate for rape in our justice system?
So sure, of course, the Home Secretary review has two phases. First of all, working out how Wayne Couzens could get, notwithstanding the warning signs, if you like, that were there, into the position that he was, without someone stopping it, checking it, and taking action in relation to it. The second phase will look at the, if you like, the wider systemic and cultural questions around attitudes to women in the police. So I think both of those areas are really important. You asked me about the rate of convictions. If you look at a case when a woman reports it, from reporting it to the police right the way through to securing a conviction, we've got to look at all of those areas. Actually, once cases go to trial, the level of conviction is actually relatively high. It's around more or less 70%. When I last looked at the data, of course, it would have been skewed by the pandemic because of the absence of jury trials or the backlog in jury trials. So the issue is much more in relation from the point of reporting the crime through to why prosecutors are not getting more trial-ready cases into the courtroom.
Okay.
And I'm looking very carefully at this from...
Isn't the case that you're dealing with a criminal justice system which has had 10 years of austerity ever since Ken Clarke was there? Every single one of your predecessors has agreed with Treasury cuts. And I was talking to a judge last night who says that the system is on its knees. You've got the biggest backlog of Crown Court cases we've ever had. And you...
So just on both of those points, first of all, in February of 2020, when we went into the lockdown, the backlog in the criminal Crown Courts was a fifth lower than when the last Labour government was in power. So obviously, though, Crown Court cases, there's been a backlog because juries haven't been able to sit. In fact, in the magistrates' courts, which amount to 85% of criminal cases, the backlog is already coming down over the last year.
You have 60,000 cases, you accept that?
Yes, and it's look. Of course, I want to deal with this. That's why we've got the super courts, the Nightingale courts, the removing the upper limit on sitting days. On funding, just to be clear, yes, of course, we had to deal with the economic aftermath of the previous Labour government, and there were difficult decisions to be made. Since 2017, there's been an increase, 9% increase in funding into my department, the Ministry of Justice. Just to be clear on the facts.
Okay. I think you meant the global financial crisis. But anyway, it's been very nice to talk to you, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference and the Prime Minister's speech.
Dominic Raab, thanks very much indeed.